Hello and welcome to another episode of the 905er with me, Roland Tanner.
I am Joel McLeod,
and today we're welcoming a third guest to our Thursday Roundtable, Laura Steiner, who is the editor and chief reporter at the Milton Reporter in one of in the other of Halton's three beautiful cities. Is Milton a city yet, or is it still a?
It's still a town. There's a lot of back and forth about the designation. I've been told that basically the only thing that would change would be business cards. So
exactly.
It's so it doesn't really.
It's the whole thing. It's the whole thing with Oakville as well. That
it's
never say city in the hearing of the mayor. So welcome, Laura. Really great to have you on. And I'll just sort of fill people in. It was funny. The reason you're on today came together at sort of very short notice, and literally I was going through Twitter this morning, and you'd posted something about renaming of Dundas Street, which obviously runs through Milton and Burlington and Oakville, and all the way from Toronto down to Dundas. And I posted a one-word reply, and then realized I was sounding really rude, and Twitter had sucked me in again, and I was sounding like a jerk. So I expanded somewhat on my intentions, and we had an interesting discussion. And I think we somewhat perhaps disagreed about that particular discussion, but we can explore that why that was. But certainly, I think we both had fair points on that. And I guess just to again fill people in, most people have heard this already. I mean, Toronto is discussing. I think has decided, haven't they, to rename Dundas Street?
The city council voted pretty much to rename Dundas Street to something else to be determined.
Yeah, which I mean, and Dundas, that only applies to their bit of Dundas, which actually runs.
However, Roland, Mayor Crombie in Mississauga has talked about renaming their stretch of Dundas to something else as well, and they were looking at what Toronto was going to do, and as well, there is, of course, Dundas, Ontario, which is a whole township associated with Hamilton, and there's talk about renaming that name to something else as well. So
I hadn't heard the Dundas town part. So
from what I've read, it's technically not like an official incorporated township, like the town of Milton, but it's I mean, if you drive through it, they have signs you're now in Dundas all over the place, and there's even a riding Hamilton
Lancaster
West Dundas, that this kind of stuff may it has big repercussions, I guess, is what we have to address.
But obviously, and it was a municipality of itself until amalgamation with Hamilton. So Dundas Town Hall is still in use as a whole, not as councils don't meet there anymore. But I guess Ted McMeekin was the last mayor, I think, of Dundas before amalgamation, I believe. I can't remember. Anyway, so yeah, we got talking about that. Why don't you kind of give your side of that story, Laura, and we can explore it a little bit, perhaps.
Okay. My side is I'm sort of approaching things. As we were discussing before we hit record, I majored in history, so my side of it is it's color. It sort of hinges a little bit on that, but not too much. But my side is basically that if you take the standards that we know now as 2021 standards, we'll say, and if you apply them to different eras, of course they're going to be lacking. If you think about, I think the example I said, if anything before 1980, that you're going to find somebody that, and if you look hard enough into the major figures, you're going to find someone that's xenophobic, someone that's anti-Islam, someone that's, and on and on it'll go. So nobody is perfect. Perfect. And that's not excusing any actions over the figures that we're probably about to discuss anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny enough. I was saying to Joel this morning, bizarrely, the whole Dundas thing is kind of multiple stages of my life coming together in a very odd way.
Mm-hmm.
And that the guy that Dundas town is named after, and actually the street is named after the town, not after the man, oddly enough. So it's at a remove. Not that necessarily makes any difference whatsoever. But he was a Scot, obviously, with a name like Dundas, and his main family estate was, he was an aristocrat, was in the town where my parents lived for the last sort of 20 years of their life. It's also where we used to vacation when we were kids, and it's one of the most stunningly beautiful places you can ever go to, in a little glen in Scotland. So it's odd to come across. I didn't really make the connection between Dundas here and Dundas over there, and it's an interest. And for people who don't know, I mean, why the street's being renamed is because of the connection between this guy, who's Henry Dundas, Viscount Melville, with an attempt to repeal slavery in Parliament in Britain. So he never came to Canada. This is not a man who was a Canadian. He wasn't a governor general or anything like that. But he was associated with the slave trade only insofar as he basically undermined an attempt to repeal slavery in Britain, and that's why he has become a focus for some people in Toronto, I understand. So it's quite different from the current discussion of connected with First Nations and John A. Macdonald and Ryerson, other than it's another case of people saying, maybe we should be naming things after these people after all. So that was just to give everybody, listeners, a little bit of background if they don't know, as I didn't a couple of weeks ago, why these streets have the names that they do. And another odd connection is I have a friend who's one of my best friends back in Scotland, who's an author who wrote a book about a slave called Joseph Knight, who actually, so he was a slave in the West Indies. His owner, for want of a better word, took him to Scotland. And when he got to Scotland, he got married and he kind of ran away. And the alleged owner, took him to court to sort of say you can't do that because you're a slave, and it was the first case in Scotland that basically said slavery is illegal in this country. You cannot own someone here. You may be able to do it in Jamaica, but you cannot do it here. And involved in that case, on the side of Joseph Knight, was this guy Dundas. He was one of the legal defenders of the former slave as he became. So it's an interesting thing. So we have this man on both sides of the argument. On one side, undermining an attempt to repeal slavery entirely in the British Empire, and on the other side, defending a slave in a court case that actually was really important in establishing that there was no such thing as slavery in Scotland under Scots law. So it's just, for me, it was a really weird coming together of different parts of my life, which is completely by the point, completely irrelevant to our discussion. But
I don't know if it's
interesting though.
It is interesting. I don't know if it's irrelevant though, because it kind of shows the kind of nuance that is somewhat lost in these arguments that get thrown out there. I mean, I'll make my point perfectly clear. I'm kind of in favor of renaming things or tearing down statues and all that. Most because I think, and we've said this before on this podcast, I think when things are named after historical figures, they're not meant in the context of let's give homage to this person's accomplishments. Because I guarantee, like, nobody in Canada knew that Dundas was named after Henry Dundas. They don't, like, nobody would know that because we're not taught that. That's just not part of the Canadian curriculum 90% of the time. When the people who name these streets and schools and put up statues and whatnot, it's more about trying to take ownership of the Canadian historical narrative to suit their purposes, which we say is about basically about declaring who's Canadian, who's not. It might be a matter of saying, like, it has to be a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male in this part of the country who gets to decide the laws and the norms and whatnot. So I find that, like, this talk of renaming stuff and tearing down statues is more about just kind of reestablishing maybe a new, more modern social order about what we value as Canadians today in the modern sense.
Well, that's sort of that's a valid point, but I kind of think there's a danger of rewriting history a little bit, because I think, not to take it totally away from the Dundas example, but if you're tearing down statues of MacDonald, of Ryerson, of McGill, I think you're gonna I think it risks, forgetting these people and their actions. Like, I'm not excusing at all what's the Indian Act or Sir John A. Macdonald's actions. I'm just, I don't think, I think that should be remembered, and I would actually keep the street name, and maybe, if you want, see if you could design some street signs with a QR code or so that'll take you to a website and learn about them and learn why.
I think where we can certainly agree, I think all three of us would agree, and I just want to recognize at this point that we're all white European people coming from one perspective, and we want to completely recognize that, and that in many ways we can, our own history and background colors our perspectives, and acknowledge that completely. However, I think we can all recognize that teaching of history in this country and in many countries, but I think has not been good, and it's been. I think we and I say this as someone who's been in Canada much less long than others and who didn't go through the school system, so I'm not exactly an expert, but that kind of myth of Canada the good, as Canada as the country that avoided a lot of the problems, say, of the US or of some other countries that were involved in colonialism, needs to be kind of challenged, and we haven't been teaching that to people. So this is almost like an opportunity.
Yeah.
And to an extent, my view is I don't care one way or the other. If the end result of all this is that either because a street is renamed, or because it's not, or because a statue stays, or because it's gone, that children and adults learn a bit more about all sides of Canadian history, the good, the bad, and the very, very ugly, then that's got to be a good thing. And I think I said, this morning, I'm willing to take a few tons of copper as the price of that.
Yeah.
Or bronze, I should say, not copper.
Yeah, I think to an extent, the whole finding the unmarked graves at Kamloops and in Saskatchewan, I think that kind of really ripped the foundations of that Canadian identity as sort of Canada the good, Canada the decent, and it's suddenly we're tearing away that layer, and we're seeing that potentially, for want of a better way to put it, we're seeing potentially that Canada possibly likely committed genocide. Is again, it's pure opinion, but
no.
Well,
but
the case is being made. Like we're there is one way or the other. I agree. Like I think I can only speak from my perspective as a white guy who grew up in the Canadian school system, and it's amazing. It's amazing. Amazed me in the last 5 years how much I've learned about this country that I wasn't taught. And part of it, like the residential school system, I remember learning that, First Nations kids were taken from the reserves and sent to boarding schools. That was it. That was pretty much what I was taught in Canadian history class. there's no talk about the horrible conditions. There's no talk about, the abuse that went on there and the real purpose of it. We're taught, we're taught that it was there to give them an education. I'm now realizing that was a lie. Like, I was lied to as a Canadian student in my high school Canadian history classes, that's what the curriculum was. Like, they were there to educate, and wasn't there to educate. It was there to brutalize and to shame these kids and to tear them down. The other thing that I did not know about Canada was that slavery existed in this country prior to Confederation. I did not know that. The extent of slavery in Canada was that we were the end of the line of the Underground Railroad. Freed slaves came to Canada, and when they got to Canada, they were free and they lived happily ever after. That was not the case, but we're not taught that. And there are things I've learned over the last couple of years on my own, just through kind of educating myself. Yeah. And there are a lot of, I'm not comparing it to the anger that First Nations people are feeling or to any racialized Canadians that are out there, but I do feel anger that I was not presented the truth, that I was expected to buy into this myth unquestioningly and be a good Canadian student and buy into this myth. And I think there are a lot of people who are out there who are like me that are waking up to this, and they're not comfortable with the reality that we're uncovering. And so I get the anger. I get the anger towards let's rename the streets and towns and tear down the monuments and the statues and all that. Because that anger is there, and it's real on a whole variety, like a whole spectrum of levels.
Well, people are being asked to fundamentally reassess beliefs in some cases they've had for 80 years. And that's not an excuse to say you don't have to do that. Facts are facts, and we have to acknowledge the truth as we understand it right now. However, I guess I do also understand that people have had a comfortable view of our past that they don't really want to give up on, because it is a good myth. It's a myth, but it's a nice myth, right? It's that kind of, we're the polite country. We avoid, we weren't perfect, but we weren't like those other guys. This is kind of the quote I keep saying all the time. And it's we don't want to give that up, but I think what we all have to emphasize is that, well, A, history is history, and if the facts are the facts, and you just have to accept it. And then B, the fuller picture, a more nuanced picture, and it would be nice. I mean, it'd be nice. It's so difficult to say the story of someone like Dundas, who was an aristocrat. He did all kinds of crappy things. I'm not one to defend the equivalent of billionaires, even when they lived hundreds of years ago. But these people were very complex, multifaceted, and they could do monstrous things, as MacDonald definitely did, while also without necessarily denying some of the other things the things that people have liked about someone like MacDonald. He's a man coming from the Scottish Enlightenment. Actually, I mean, Scotland is a thing that I used to do work on, so I'm always bringing it back to things I know about. So I was sorry about that. But he's coming from a point of view of scientific and kind of modern thinking man.
I want to hear what Laura, your thoughts on the whole thing. Like, what's
the MacDonald side of it?
Well, not just like I kind of want to go back to the whole. Like, do you think it's what do you think we're losing by taking down a statue or renaming a street?
Well, taking down the statues and I think it makes it easier for those figures that, if you're taking down a statue, to sort of fade into the background a lot easier. And and the old saying goes that those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. I'm not saying that, but I think that's kind of my fear with getting rid of the statues.
Would it be better? Sorry, go ahead.
Go on.
Oh, I was going to say, would it be better if we put a plaque detailing, outline who they were, what? Because that's the other thing is you have these statues to Ryerson up.
Yeah.
And I'm I'll be honest. Aside from the last couple of weeks, I didn't know who the hell Ryerson was. Like I didn't. If you went to Ryerson University, you probably knew, but I didn't know the detail of Ryerson's history in this country until the last few weeks. And like, what would it make more sense to put like a plaque or some kind of detail, like why we actually have a statue of some dude?
I think that would make more sense. Yeah, but again, it's I think from my perspective, I think there's a fear of forgetting history, and you don't want to go too far down that road either.
No,
right?
Of course not.
Yeah. Because
I think we'd all defend
to remember. We want to. I think we're going to spend generations probably trying to atone for what happened with the First Nations in the residential schools, and and there will be an awful lot of hard work to be done in building those relationships and rebuilding that trust, and it's going to take a long time to do.
I will say this: I'm thankful that you made the argument that you're making, as opposed to it's going to cost us so much money to rename Dundas. Because that's honestly the only
practical.
Well, that's
side of it too, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but I mean that's the argument I always see is, it's going to cost so much money to rename it. I'm like, who cares?
That's such a small
it's a small amount in terms of the city's budget. It's not going to change anything. And then like, it could be spent on so many other things. Like, that's the problem, is that the money, decide what to spend it on
But the compromise also is keeping a statue in a museum as well.
Well, I tend to think of that like people who get really worked up in the southern states. I mean, I think there's no defense for those statues in the South are beyond indefensible. But if you really care about history, stick them in a museum. There's all kinds of statues in museums around the world.
Wouldn't it be great just to put it in a park, like especially Toronto? Everybody complains about Toronto has no great parks, and wouldn't it be great to take those statues and put them actually in a park along a path that you could actually go and bike or run or walk along, and while you're getting fit and whatnot, you can take in a bit of history.
I think it would. Yeah, I think it'd have to be contextualized, because I mean the irony is, so I did a little bit of reading last week because I went down this huge rabbit hole, and the conclusion I came to is like the statue that should be pulled down is less of MacDonald and more of Alice, a guy whose name I can hardly remember, but I think it's Alistair Mackenzie, who was the Prime Minister after MacDonald, who was the one who passed the Indian Act. It wasn't MacDonald who passed that. Now, would he have done? Sure he would. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they all would have done the same thing. The Indian Act was not controversial as far as I can see when it was passed. However, he has, I think there's probably only one statue of him in Canada, and no one knows who he is. So he's not a particularly good target. I don't want to use the word target.
No, target's a good word.
There are good reasons for activists to want to focus on someone like MacDonald. I mean, because you're an activist and you want to get attention, and that's perfectly credible and fair thing to do.
And he's
as someone trying to raise an issue.
He's the first prime minister, so
exactly, yeah. But his statue is there in Ottawa, and it's like, I don't think anybody knows who Alice, the guy whose name I can't keep on forgetting. Alexander Mackenzie, yeah. So I guess second Prime Minister of Canada.
Here's the thing.
People always saying.
Here's the thing, Roland. Few Canadians can actually name all the Prime Ministers of Canada in order. You might be able to get back to 1980. You could be able to get back maybe to Trudeau, but after that, people have a hard time remembering who was the prime ministers prior to that.
And probably most countries have a bit of that. I mean, I think in Canada we're particularly. I mean, the reputation of Canadian history is that it's kind of boring, right? I mean, I've heard that from Canadians. I'm not making that up. Is that a fair thing to say?
It is fair.
I mean, it's a reputation. I'm not saying it's a fair reputation. I'm just saying.
I would see. Here's the thing. I'm going to counter that point by saying, no, we were taught a sanitized version.
Right,
If you think about it, we're learning the real history of Canada, and that is sorry.
That's valid.
Well, I was going to say, like, there's a darker side to Canadian history that we're waking up to that no one was taught. And so, when you're taught the sanitized version, yeah, it's a pretty, we're nice and polite, and we're go get them kind of people. But since 1867, like, we're talking about clearing out the prairies for settlement forcefully. Like, there's the RCMP, then the Northwest Mounted Police, were created with the intention of clearing out large swaths of the prairies for colonization. We don't talk about that. We talk about Sam Steele and he the heritage minute of keeping all the drunk Americans out with their guns just by his sheer will, and that's what we like to think. But we don't think about the other side of it is no. The Mounties went in and took these children off from their parents and put them on trains to go to schools where they were abused. We don't talk about that. Now we're starting to. And that's why I think you're seeing a lot of anger. There's a for a lot of white Canadians, there's a realization that we were lied to about our country for a good number of years. It's not on par with what happened to the First Nations, and it's not comparable, but there is an anger there. And that's why I see the tearing down the I have a problem with the deifying these statues of, they're so sacred and we must preserve them, when the majority of other Canadians can't tell, aside from MacDonald, who any other notable Canadians were.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good point. Probably a good point to leave it on. Certainly, I wish, and certainly not. This is not the impression I got at any point from your comment, Laura, at all this morning. But from some other people, some politicians in particular in Canada, like if you showed 1% of the concern for those First Nations children lying in schoolyards across the nation that you are currently showing for a statue, it would be nice to, really, let's get our priorities right here.
And the boil water advisories.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
definitely.
Really.
So that's kind of anyway. I'm gonna get way off topic.
You know what else?
No, not at all.
No, you know what else is going on? What else is going on in Milton?
Yeah, Milton expert. Come on.
Well, there's quite a bit. Quick introduction. I've lived here since the mid 80s, and it's gone from a really small town, 32,000, and now we're up a little over 130,000, I think now, and the difference is crazy since 2000 with the big pipe, and and council here is continuing to struggle with that growth, I think, and accommodating it. And just there's whole go on.
Well, I was just going to say, like, we've kind of talked about it on the podcast before, but the two main issues that we've noticed were the CN Rail Hub always seems to be the focus sticking point, and the big issue we thought was the kind of 180 turnaround of this town council for the Highway 413, which we didn't quite get how that how that came to be.
The 413, I'll be honest here. I'll be honest. Like there's been a lot going on. I've tried to cover a lot of the COVID stuff, and I haven't really dived into the 413 issue yet. But I've been sort of following it through the pointer.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is kind of that's a bit of a surprise, because that's on my list of things to look into. But I'm at a loss to explain that as well, because it's going. I think it'll crisscross somewhere north of Campbellville, Brookville area is my best guess. And so anyway, we did have a university announced a couple of weeks ago now.
Yeah.
And it felt like a very hurried announcement. I just gotten the provincial notice that morning, like a couple of hours before, and I wasn't even sure I was going to be able to go in person because of the whole COVID thing and stuff. And
was that a matter, in your opinion, a matter of trying to curry favor to secure votes? Because I mean, we're what, a year away from a provincial election, just about.
In my opinion, to be blunt, yes. Short answer is yes, because
I mean, Ford and the Conservatives have not been. They're not riding high in the polls,
No.
and a lot of people are upset with how COVID has unfolded in this province. And I've noticed that there is a lot in the 905, particularly in Halton, of kind of, let's give them what they want. All of a sudden, let's just kind of find the money to give them what they want. There's
some really in Milton, I think there's going to be some very ugly dynamics, because Parngill, I did a couple of stories on it. Parngill won the nomination through there was some allegations of fraud, and I found that out because one of my sources was with the Liberal Party of Canada, and so they got a letter to summons to come and vote, basically, is what happened. And so there was like a lot of bad blood there, a little bit. And fast forward to now, he's really, I'm not sure he's very popular at all in the riding. I've talked to him, for the record, I've talked to him quite a few times, and he's a nice guy, but I'm just not in the ride. I just don't know him in the riding. Well, he's very popular.
He's bumped up to parliamentary assistant, right? To
minister.
So he's actually, he's a full minister, is he?
Yeah, I want to say citizenship and immigration, but I'm probably
you're right.
wrong.
That's it. And this is the PC. He's a PC MPP, obviously for Milton, right? Yeah.
And he's going to be the Liberal candidate for this area is Ward 4 Councillor Samira Ali.
Okay.
And there's some past there because she initially helped out one of you guys probably know, one of the regional councillors here ran against Parngill for the nomination and lost, and she was involved with that campaign. So it's going to be ugly. We'll say it's going to be ugly, I think.
It's just going in a slightly different direction. I mean, the council. I mean, what's Milton Council like? I mean, it's of all the councils in the region, it's the one I know least about, other than that Gord Krantz has been around since Adam was a lad, and looks like he'll be around for a bit longer.
Good way to describe it. So council, it's hard to. There's a mix right now. I think it's going through a bit of it might be going through a bit of a generational change at some point. Certainly you've got sort of the stalwarts, Councillor Rick Malboeuf in Ward 2. Mike Cluett's been in there since 2010. And I'm trying to remember somebody. And Colin Bess has been in there forever as well. But then on the younger side, you've got ward councillors and Christina Tesser-Dirksen and Samira Ali, and they're younger, they're more, I think, a little bit forward thinking. There's been a bit of a push to be more environmentally thinking in terms of the environment, and that's come from Christina mostly, and a lot from Christina. And there's also like a return. There's also John Challinor has returned. I can't remember how many years it's been since he was last on council, but he's returned back. But it's really kind of a mix of older guard. And if you're listening, I'm sorry, Colin, if you're listening to
this. That kind of seems to be the I mean, that's kind of par for the course when it comes to municipal councils.
Yeah.
Like once you get in there, it's really hard to turf you out. Like you kind of have to screw up really badly. Like, you kind of have to kick the baby to really, to really people say, I want you gone. But I mean, the problem is that, as you said, Milton has grown exponentially.
Yeah.
In one generation. And that's, it kind of, I don't know, I just find that's a recipe for disaster when your council doesn't kind of keep up with the change that's happening.
And I think that we're kind of starting to see that a little bit now with the latest, at their most recent council meeting, they approved a development for 2 residential towers at the northwest corner of Bronte and Main Street. And it was an old TSC store, and it's like 17 and 18-story towers on that lot. And it was that meeting had the second second public meeting under the Planning Act about that. And they went ahead and approved it. And the residents, because it was the second public meeting I'd sat through, the residents were saying, look, we know there's going to be growth here. We're not completely blind to that fact, but we just want to manage it.
Right.
And then like they were perfectly willing to say, okay, we have to have this growth, but can you maybe chop the height down a little bit, because in that area
sounds like a familiar story.
That's what we're going to say. Like it kind of seems to be a similar refrain across all the communities in the 905.
It is, we do need to grow, but it's that feeling of growth that isn't.
And
it's difficult to put into words, but
and there's some sense that this council is scared of LPAT, of going to LPAT and saying, listen, our residents realize there's going to be growth in that area, but they want, to try to mediate some kind of solution where, maybe it's not 18 and 17, maybe it's 12 and 14. It's really tough. So that's
this is and these things have the potential. I mean, so in Burlington 4 years ago, it was a huge issue that is still, it's kind of rumbling on now. I mean, so Burlington has recently, its big announcement from the provincial government was that the urban growth center would be rejigged and kind of moved closer to the station. And without getting into that whole thing, but this. I find it interesting that basically you can go to every town in the 905, and I think similar things would be under discussion, and this is ultimately a provincial thing, particularly the LPAT as a provincial thing, and that I don't know of any of the provincial parties who are talking about planning reform or changing the way that we do things in this province, and I don't know why that is, because I feel like, if one of those 3 parties grabbed LPAT and really ran with it and said, we got to change this, they would have armies of 905ers marching in to vote for them. So,
exactly. It's really, because it's tough.
Well, Laura, what I was going to ask, what do you think is going to be the election issue provincially next year? I think a lot of people are counting on it to be kind of a referendum on Doug Ford's management of the pandemic. But I mean, is that going to be the case? Do you think within a year, we're going to be back to the issues of municipal jurisdiction?
The pandemic is going to loom very large, I think, for a long time. At least for the rest of this year. I'm not sure about 2022, but I think it's only fair to have that as a referendum for his of his leadership. But that's if he isn't gone by then, because my personal theory is with this I think back a few months ago when he was coming out so hard, trying to give all these police forces the power the powers, and then the police forces started saying, no, we don't want them. I think there might have been a breakdown then. And because you've got the legislative branch, the executive branch setting out these powers, and then the ones that enforce them are saying no, are saying no, we don't want them. And it's like, how long?
Yeah.
It's significant. Mm-hmm. It's how long is that relationship repairable? So I was kind of thinking with this last cabinet shuffle where you have Rod Phillips back. It's again the three names that opposed him for the leadership were Christine Elliott, Caroline Mulroney, Rod Phillips. Now they're all back, and he's kind of in some trouble now. I wouldn't be surprised if that shuffle might have been the last a last ditch effort to possibly save his leadership, because I think I was saying that, and I should have asked that. Like I was saying that because I would love to know what the party's numbers versus what his numbers are, because chances are it might be a case where the PCs can win if they picked a new leader.
Well, Roll and I have talked about this offline, is that just because you're tanking in the polls doesn't mean you're going to lose. No. Because campaigns are their own, they're completely their own
animal. Yeah,
exactly. And, we've noticed some of the NDP are falling into the same old pattern that they've always gone into, where, they almost seem terrified of actual power. Aside from Andrea Horwath and Merritt Stiles, who's the education critic, name who are the all-star NDP candidates. I saw somebody online point out, you need the 905 to win this province. That's mathematically, that's a fact. Yet, name me who the NDP all-stars are in Peel, Halton, or Niagara region, or up near York and Vaughan. You can't, because they don't have any, and that to me is telling. They don't have a game plan to win. The Liberals, on the other hand, they're riding high in the polls. But I pose it to you again: name me who their all-star, aside from Michael Coteau, there's been talk that he's going to jump ship to the federal scene. Maybe not. But in the 905,
he's officially announced that. I think that's definitely a thing. Okay. Yeah, I think so.
But
someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure.
I don't think so. But I mean, in the 905 region, who are the all-star candidates that are going to win this region for the Liberals? And I've yet to hear of any.
I'll be honest here. I think Samira can.
Okay.
She's got, it's going to be hard work, but she's, I know her personally, and she's up to it. She's up for it.
And people with proven track records of having run in elections and won in elections is never something you want to ignore. Winners win, right?
But again, she's got to get through the campaign, which I suspect will be ugly.
No doubt. All right. Well, I think we're coming up on the end of this episode, so I'm going to call it quits, and I think we should all pat ourselves on the back for a good episode.
Yeah.
Laura, thank you very much for coming on and joining us tonight to have this chat. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks for having me. I hope to hopefully
we'll do this
come back again sometime.
Yeah.
So.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns, or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
You looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.